Born in New Jersey, in an industrial town similar to Liverpool, Lance Wyman was inspired by his no-nonsense surroundings, which led to his unique approach of design. Graduating from the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn with a degree in industrial design, Lance's experience in logos didn't actually occur until 1962, where he created graphics for the USA Pavilion at the Zagreb Trade Fair in Yugoslavia. In 1966, Lance left for Mexico to participate in a competition, and 2 years later, and just in his late 20s, Lance soon became a respected leader in the world of graphic design by creating the legendary identity for the Mexico '68 Olympic Games. Lance has been described as one of the greatest graphic designers of our time, a rock star of graphic arts, and of course, not forgetting the jewel of his crown, the headline speaker at tonight's Designival Festival. Without further ado, please welcome Lance Wyman all the way from the USA. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I hope I live up to all of that. Okay, what I'd like to do is kind of run you through a lot of the experiences I've had as I've gone through my career, and I've had a long career now, and in looking back at some of the early things in my life, I realized how important they were. Starting off, yes, I was born in Newark, New Jersey, but I grew up in Kearney, and you can see that on the map here. And that is an industrial town, and I do feel very comfortable here in Liverpool. There's a lot of qualities come out of that kind of environment, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I did go to school at Pratt, and Pratt is in Brooklyn. That's also on the map. And at the moment, well, for the moment of the last, since 1970, I've lived in Manhattan, and you can see the spot there. We're right across from the Museum of Natural History, if you're familiar with Manhattan, and right near Central Park. A little of my background. My first name is David, and you know the story in the family is that I was named after the Delaware. I was named David Lance Wyman, and that comes from the Delaware-Lackawanna Western Railroad. And that sounds a little weird, doesn't it? But my grandfather was an engineer for 45 years on that railroad, and he was really one of my favorite people in my life. When he was retired, he told me a lot of stories, and he had a lot of stories because he was in the Spanish-American War. After he got out of that, he went out to the western part of the United States, and he was actually out in New Mexico when Billy the Kid was out there, and he actually met Pat Garrett, the guy that supposedly shot Billy the Kid. So I got all those stories. I mean, he really filled me full of those things. So, you know, of course, there he is as a young man out in New Mexico, and I think initially I had no idea what a designer was. I wanted to be a cowboy after hearing a lot of his stories. My father was a fisherman. He ran a boat off the coast of New Jersey, and I spent a lot of time with him. And I have to say, you know, the whole maritime aesthetic, I mean, when you get into the compasses and the wheels and the wheelhouse and the knots and things like that, there's a certain aesthetic that comes off that kind of functional sea endeavor, and that has been a big influence. I spent a lot of time on that boat when I was in my early teens. I made models when I was a kid, so, you know, I had a bent for being able to draw and do things like make models and so forth, so that ultimately led into you know, what I'm doing now. I was the kid in the class that could draw. I imagine a lot of you who are involved in design had that same experience when you were young. You were the kid in the class, or at least one of them, that could draw. Now, in thinking about early influences, I remember the first time I saw an image, a graphic image that really impressed me was on the Los Angeles Rams football helmet. And I quite liked that team, and I remember there was one, they had a quarterback, Bob Waterfield, and I thought he was terrific. And I realized that he was married to Jane Russell. And when I was about 13 years old, I drew a picture of Jane. She was on the cover of Life magazine, I think it was, and I drew it, and I sent it to her, and I wanted her autograph, I told her, but I said I also wanted the autograph of her husband, Bob Waterfield. And I actually got a letter back from Jane Russell and Bob Waterfield. And I show this because I think along the way, you kind of need these little things to happen. They become little things and big things, whether it's big or small. They are little moments in your life that give you confidence in what you're doing. And this was very meaningful to me. I got a letter back, and I had Bob Waterfield's autograph, but she said, "Keep up the good work. Your work shows definite promise." So that was good to hear as a kid. I have been involved with a lot of sports graphics. I did participate in sports when I was a kid. Boxing was one of my, that was a short-lived career. I think I was in a boys club, and I had 3 fights. And as you get more fights under your belt, you get in with people that are kids that are better and better. And I got hit with a counter punch, and I never knew what happened. I was just sitting on the seat of my pants. So I didn't follow that one up. Another thing in sports, I show the sports things because I think, as a young boy, I think it's important to participate in this type of thing as much as you have the ability to. I wasn't a very good I wasn't a very good athlete as a kid, but you learn things and of course for me it was very helpful later in my career. In this particular one, I was on a team in the same boys club that we won the seniors championship, so that's my big accomplishment in sports. I also played football for 4 years, and I got banged around quite a bit, so I know how to fall. I know how to do that well. That's about all I got out of that. Now, in my senior year in Kearney High School, it was more of a popularity contest, but I ran for senior class president, and this was my poster. So this is really my first presidential poster, and I won. So I've gotten better, but that's how it started in the sense of doing posters. And you can see here's my. This was in our Kearney High School newspaper, and it was tough. I mean, I did grow up in a factory town. My dad was in military most of his life. My mom was a typist, and we were fairly poor actually. And I didn't really have much as far as pushing me into going to college or anything like that. But being as the class president, I was interviewed by the class newspaper, and they asked, all of us, there were 4 officers, what we were going to do. And God, when it got to me, I was really kind of not sure what I was going to do, but I said I was going to follow my art, and that's what I've done. I read that actually, and it's funny when you say something and then you see it in print. It kind of got more important to me, and it did make sense. Here's a guy that was really, really influential on me. It's Pablo Casals, and I was a high school student, and we had little television sets then, and I saw this old guy. He was 85 then, giving a cello lesson to a younger man who was about 45. And I was watching this. I mean, I'm not into music in that way, but I was watching just the character of Pablo Casals, and I was thinking, this old guy is actually acting and looking younger than this other guy that's taking the lesson. And I just had that sense of, I want to do something like that in my life. I want to do work in my life that, keeps me young, like Pablo. So it was another one of those little lessons along the way that you kind of look back at and say, yeah, I remember that. The Red Bull soccer team, football team, they have their new stadium 5 blocks from where I grew up in Kearney. They're actually in Harrison, but I was down at that border side of Kearney. And in the New York Times, the Red Bulls Arena glitters in an industrial wasteland just east of Newark. Well, that's my hometown, Kearney. And I gave a talk over at Princeton, and that's why I put this in there, because thank God that I had the factories, because I was able to work. I'd work like 7 days a week and 12-hour night shifts. I mean, I didn't have much social life during those periods when I was going to college, but I could pay without having any assistance. I could pay for my whole tuition, and you can't do that now. I mean, unless you're in a state school or you have some means of having someone pay for your tuition. You can't work your way through and pay for 1 year in the summer's work in a factory. So thank God for that. That was really helpful in my career. Not only that, I learned a lot working in the factories. I mean, if you want to talk about learning politics and learning how things work and learning how to survive in an environment that's a pretty tough environment, and learn skills to do what you had to do in that environment, that was a lot of big lessons there. I finally got into Pratt. Now, I should talk a little bit about getting into Pratt. I found that was the school in the New York area that was really the best one to get in. I couldn't get into Pratt my first year because I was really not a good student. And they told me at Pratt I had to do a year in another, junior college or something and keep a B+ average, and then they'd let me think about getting in. So I went to Fairleigh Dickinson, and it was a kind of one of those wonderful experiences that I had nothing like it in design school. But at that time, I'm just in between the Korean War and the Vietnam War. So at that time, the guys were coming back from Korea, and they were very serious. They were on the GI Bill, and they really wanted to get a good education. And I was just getting out of high school, being a kind of a screw-off, student. And all of a sudden, I'm in this kind of very serious environment. And I remember it was in an English class, and the English teacher was the basketball coach. And he said, the first day in the class, he said, no books in this class. Well, all these guys getting back from Korea, they thought that was bullshit. They wanted to have books, this was English. And he said, no, you'll get enough English. He says, but all English is a way of communicating. And he says, what we're going to do is go out and test communication. So we went out every week and recorded communication that failed and then brought it back in. And we did that for a whole semester. And the whole idea, and as designers, we're mandated to communicate. And the whole idea from that is that if you have something that you are mandated to communicate, and if it doesn't come out the other end where it communicates, you've really screwed up. And that was a sense of seeing things that screwed up as far as the intention of communication, but really going through a semester in school where it was analyzed. And honest to God, I think that was the thing that got me into communication in such a big way, because I didn't really realize at that point that I was interested necessarily in communication. So this is my second year at Pratt, and this is Chico Hamilton. I did a sculpture of Chico Hamilton, and it's in the window of the IBM gallery. So this was really one of my first successes as far as designing. I don't look very happy. That's the only picture I have, though. This was a big turning point, and I guess what I'm talking about in some of these early experiences is where you get to that point, and it's like something happens, or you get an insight that really kind of propels you onward in what you ultimately wind up doing. I had a hard time at Pratt, actually, when I got in, because the Industrial Design School was an extremely stylized school, and my work never really has been, geared to copying style, and that's, when you're in a stylized environment, that's basically what you have to do to adhere to it. So I had some problems, but General Motors instigated a student program between my junior and senior year, and they came around, they interviewed students in the Industrial Design School, and I got chosen to represent the Pratt Industrial Design Department at General Motors in a summer program. So here you see me circled here, and these are students from all over the country, so they were all of the students that represented the different programs, and I had a chance to work with that environment for the entire summer. At that time, modular building was in the industrial design mentality quite a bit. So for the summer program, I did the industrial design program. I did what I called a botel. It was a modular structure that you could build a kind of a botel where instead of driving into a motel, you drive in with your boat, and same kind of principle. So I did the program for the industrial design, and I also got into the graphic design program by meeting a student from Yale. And at that time, graphic design was not taught in the undergraduate schools in New York, and it really came from Europe, and it came specifically to Yale. It came through the graduate program. Paul Rand, people like that. He specifically was the professor of the student I met at the GM program. And man, when I saw that, when I saw the idea of putting conceptual thinking into simple form like this, I really migrated toward that, and I've never turned back. This was for Hyatt roller bearings. This was part of that student program also. That's me in my senior year. I went back to Pratt after that program, and you can see across the top of my workspace, you see a lot of Saul Bass, work. So I really started getting into looking at graphic design and what was being done at that time. And you can see on the wall I have a few images that I did. One that fish image was one. You are what you eat. Now these were things that I started getting into while I was still, I was finishing up my industrial design. Columbia, I think it was Contemporary Records was a project from school. But you can see that, I was really getting into the very simple geometry at that point, and I really never turned back from that. My folks, they didn't lose their home, but they really did have to kind of downgrade, and they wound up living in a trailer park. And I was a little embarrassed that my graduating yearbook had my home as being in a trailer park. And in that senior year, and this is interesting, this touches me when I show these, because I thought, well, I can give dignity to the trailer. And so in my senior project, I took a concept of taking a trailer and developing a way of transforming it into a pretty good-looking kind of living environment. And that's the interior. And actually, the school entered it into a national competition, and I won an honorable mention. It was an open competition to architects, and it wasn't just a student competition. So that was right when I graduated from industrial design. And I did get hired at General Motors. I went back to General Motors. And what I'm going to show you now is just kind of a career path. And if you're familiar with my website, it's you can see more detail than I'm going to give you on it. But basically, it's using the spiral, and you can see the beginning of my work, and that goes up as far as the Olympics, which I'll show you in depth. And then from that point on, now the Olympics were in 1968, and since then. This is kind of a record of the work that I've done. I guess I haven't trashed the logo. I've still been doing logos. But I'm going to talk a little bit about that because Simon made some good points about, logos. And I think, some of the things that I've gotten into in my career kind of solve some of those questions that come up about logos. Here I am at General Motors. The first project I did was the Delco parts symbol and the packaging. You can see that it's not so dissimilar to some of the things I was doing at Pratt, and this is probably why I was hired. And I developed a packaging program for all of the auto parts at General Motors, and this was a real systems experience. They had 14 different packages. Round packages, square packages, Cefton cans, et cetera, So at that point, I had big corporation up to here, and I really had enough systems to do me, but they were still drafting in the States then, and I knew I was going to get drafted. So I joined the Michigan National Guard. And it's funny because I joined the Guard the same day as I got my draft notice, and my draft board honored it. So that meant I went away and I had 6 months of active duty, and instead of 2 years. But I had 6 years after that of reserve, so I was kind of a little uptight, wondering whether I was ever going to have to go to Vietnam, which fortunately they didn't bring in the reserves on that one. So here I am. Now, I show this because it was an interesting experience because I did a lot of mapping. I was in the advanced infantry, and I was in the Fire Direction Center, so I really learned a lot about maps. So the experience was a good one as far as giving me some tools that I could use later on in my career. Zagreb was mentioned. I came back from the military, and I really wanted to come back to New York because I didn't want to stay out at General Motors, but there wasn't really much going at that time. It was like, the economy was quite bad. And I had a friend that was working in a small office, and they had just gotten a contract to do a trade fair in Zagreb, Yugoslavia. And he said, come by and interview for it, because I think you'd be interested, and I think you could do a good job on it. So there I am. I'm just out of the service. I got the job, and I did the graphics for the Zagreb Trades Fair. Now, the theme of that show, this was another one of those moments that was a turning point. I mean, I studied industrial design. I'm adept at understanding space. And here was an opportunity to do, a logo or a branding element. And the theme of the show was constructive use of leisure time. So I did the sun and the moon and put it in an hourglass and suggested we make the entrance. Working in Detroit at that time, it was like, that was another industrial town experience. And, if you had an idea there, they'd do it, And this was one of the suggestions, and they thought, yeah, let's do it. So we did it, and this is probably the largest, application of a branding element. And I did that very, very early in my career. You can see the hourglass fence. We vacuum formed them in Detroit and shipped them over and put them together. And you can see over to the right. So that was a big experience. Oh, here's the fence here. I do have a detail of it. I finally got a chance to come back to New York, and I had a good chance to come back because I was hired by, this is George Nelson, and I worked at the George Nelson office for about 2.5 years. And I got hired specifically to do the graphics for the Chrysler World's Fair Pavilion. Now, it was a kind of an interesting pavilion because it was all islands. They made an artificial water or lake and put these islands on. It was for children. It was all lessons really through rides and so forth about the construction and the process of making automobiles. And here, this was combining branding and combining the whole interactive possibilities of branding. It was for kids, so I made a VIP, a very important person, using the Chrysler logo on the cuff and giving it to kids when they entered the Chrysler Pavilion. And also, because of it being such a complicated, environment, we needed signing. So I used the same element as signposts pointing to all of the different things on the site. So this was really my first experience of getting into wayfinding, and I should say branding wayfinding, because this was really, a way of doing that kind of work that started making a lot of sense for me. One of the things that I got back into the systems thinking again, because I did a series of safety posters for the show, and I did it with the idea of making safety posters that kids would understand, but I also, coming out of the factories, I knew all the things you had to, kind of be safe about. So I developed a little character and then put him through all of the experiences that what can happen if you don't pay attention. And here you can see all the safety posters. Howard Miller Clock Company actually produced these. That was one of George Nelson's clients. And these things became the safety posters in big corporations like DuPont. They put them in all their factory facilities. So again, that whole factory environment experience that I had, it really paid off. I mean, I knew what I was doing when I was doing safety posters. Now, there's been talk about clients. For me, client is always my partner when I'm doing any kind of work. And this particular project was for the United States Information Agency, and it was a traveling show on industrial design in the United States. And we did I didn't get involved with the exhibit itself, but I did all the graphics, and I did a magazine with George on it. And I was having a hard time. And we were mandated, we could work with the stars and the stripes and so forth. And that, I don't think that we could do that in the States except for things like this. But I was having a hard time. And the officer of the show said, do something, why don't you do something clever like a slinky? And, that was, thank you, client. That was a helpful suggestion. And I took the stripes of the flag, and this was the logo. This is the brochure I did with George. It was the poster for the show and so forth. It was at this period in time, and I won't go through any the details because it's a bit complicated, but one of the Mexican designers from the Mexican pavilion was hired by George. He was an architect, and it was through him that I made the contact of being able to go to Mexico and participate in a competition to do the graphics. At that time, I had come over to London, and one of the fellows in the office was a Royal College graduate, and he had a brother that was studying at the Royal College. So I said, look up my brother. So it was through that contact that I met Peter Murdoch. And Peter had at that time, he was just at the point of graduating, and he had won the scholarship from the Royal College to go any place he wanted for a year, and they'd finance it. So he was going to come to New York, and when he heard I worked for George Nelson, we became instant buddies because George was one of the big designers for Herman Miller Furniture. So Peter came over to New York, and we worked very well together. We realized that there's Peter on his paper chair, spotty, and he developed that during the period when we started working together. And we were actually thinking of starting an office in New York together, and then I told you this Mexican opportunity came up, and we decided to go for it. So we got a slot to go down to Mexico. The deal was you went down for 2 weeks, and if nothing happened, you went back home, and if something happened, well, thank God it happened with us, you were hired. So we only had one-way tickets, so I'm glad something happened. There's Peter on the right. There's my wife, Neela, in the center, and that's me on the left. This is our very first day in Mexico City. We had our one-way tickets. We flew down and then got to work right away, just about. Now, for the Olympic program, we weren't mandated in too many areas. One was we had to use the 5 rings. We had to use 3 languages. At that time, for that Olympics, it was Spanish, French, and English. And all they said is, we don't want a Mexican sitting under a cactus with a sombrero sleeping. That was it, And I had very, very, very little knowledge about Mexico. I practically lived over at the Museum of Anthropology. All I knew about Mexico, my background in college and high school was kind of an English history background. And there's not a lot at that point there wasn't about Mexico in that. And I knew they had piñatas, but God, when I bumped into some of those early cultures, it was like a treasure trove of sense of place. It really was in my mind, and I think in a lot of people's minds, what Mexico was all about. So we started off with the rings. Now, this was, computers didn't come in until the 80s. This was back in '66, actually, when we went down to Mexico. And I still have my compasses. And I call this a compass sketch, but this was really the notion of taking those rings and putting them to work and working off the geometry of them to create the 68 happened. I was the lucky one that hit on that, and we were right at the end of our 2 weeks, so we were really uptight because how were we going to get back? And the whole embarrassment of going down there and nothing happening. So then, from this, I was able to take it and put it into its form. You can see that the letters are smushed together. That wasn't intentional. That was because of the geometry of how these 2 number forms worked around that 5-ring symbol of the Olympics. But from that, it was certainly possible to take that and develop the typography, the three-line typography, and pushing everything together, it gave us a very integrated lineal structure. So from that, and at this time, people like Bridget Riley, who was a big influence on me, were part of a show in New York on op art. So that was going down as far as the art world was concerned. So there was a real stimulus there to keep the boldness of this really, really happening. So this, by letting that initial, rings expanding into the 68 and then developing the typography, then let the whole thing expand out, is the genesis of the entire program in a lot of ways. And this, again, going back to the pre-Hispanic work, if you look at any of those early cultures, like the Olmec, those people were absolutely wonderful as far as the way they could take simple forms and express their mythology and other aspects of communication in very, very strong, bold terms. And we kept that in mind big time. And that was that image is of a clay stamp. I think they use these for body markings. And of course, one of the stamps I did for the Olympics was the radiating Mexico 68. The other big influence, and this is one good example of it, is the folk art that was going down and still is in Mexico. This is a huichol wool painting, and what they do is they cover a board with wax and then press wool into it, and you can see it's a lineal structure. And one thing that we did, we actually had some of the Huichol Indians come over, and we gave them boards with the silk screen of the 68 on it and let them apply their own color. And from that, we got some interesting color combinations. But the thing that was very helpful is that the structure of the basic graphics allowed us to go through a lot of color variation, which was also very Mexican, without losing the visual identity of that structure. And this was very helpful with the parallel line, facility and having the color. Again, Mexico, for one of the final series of stamps, I was able to take a very diverse series of things to represent and tie it all together with those radiating parallel line imagery effects. It was good for postage stamps, but it was also good when you get into the large scale applications. We radiated out from the entranceways of the stadium, and this is, you can see, very large. It was very nice when you flew into the city to see this from the air. And this is a stadium that was a university stadium, and Mexico didn't have the money they had in Tokyo 4 years earlier to build new facilities for everything. So we really, because of that, and because we had a strong graphic beginning here, we really put the graphics to work, and it kind of become known as the Graphic Olympics. Dimensional applications, we did quite a few of these. Again, doing this type of imagery at this scale is pretty easy now, but I mean, they painted these things on the walls, and you can see the line work here. And the interesting thing with this, it had to be pretty accurate, or all your eye went to was the mistakes. And they were wonderful. It was so really great working with the technicians in Mexico. We had the pattern printed on materials and for uniforms, and you can see one of the murals in the background there. And again, with the parallel stripes, you didn't need the Mexico really. All you needed was stripe patterns, and you knew it was part of the Olympics. We did explore with a lot of application areas. We flew balloons. They were color-coded above the various venues, so you could see them from the roadways. And this was one of my favorites. This is the Mexican pavilion at the Triennale in Milan. And what it is basically, it's the Mexico 68 radiating as the floor plan, and just let it radiate up the walls, and then there was a mirror image of the floor on the ceiling. So it was an absolutely complete environment generated by that the graphic motif. Now, I'll show you a few things from our program there, but I think that basic branding element of the Mexico 68, it still survives, and every time the Olympics roll around, I always get a lot of interviews and so forth talking about that program, and I never get tired of it. I mean, it was one of those experiences in my life that was just absolutely, it was like all the stars lined up, and I'd like to have another one like that sometime. We had, at that point, we only had 19 sporting events in the Olympic Games in Mexico. So we, by focusing on a part of the human body or a piece of equipment, developed the 19 sporting events. When water was involved, it became part of the symbol. And here you can see all of them. One thing that we really tried to do was to throw out the 3 languages, because, I mean, you all know that if you have to do a publication in 3 languages, it's a real hop in the ass, and if you have to do signage, it's even worse probably, because, you have to keep signage simple. So we tried to develop a program where we didn't really use any of those 3 languages. The icons were kind of based on the glyph systems. This is a Mayan glyph system where they kept things very descriptive and very simple. Another area that I use as a guiding or an influence was the way the Greeks used the silhouettes. We're all familiar with the Greek runners and so forth. And what I did was take the silhouette and, as we look now, not like the Greeks, but more like we look. And this had two reasons. I didn't have really a lot of resources as far as material. We didn't have Google then. So I remember most of my images came from one of the guys at the Olympic Committee was from Czechoslovakia, and he got all their papers all the time. And they just had these wonderful photographs in their sports section. And I really got a lot of the images that I could transform into silhouettes from that. And I couldn't have any kind of, there was no registering colors. So it was really black overprinting on a colored background with the Mexico 68 dropped out. So you can kind of, not have registering so much and you don't even notice it. The stamp was designed, so each of the stamps, so that when you took the same stamp and put it next to each other, you got the images running through. So again, using static imagery, but kind of trying to keep motion and keeping movement as part of all the elements was, again, something we tried to do. The stamps themselves became a very important part of the overall branding system. And I was coming up by cab along the West Side Highway in New York, and I looked out the window. I was with my wife, and I thought I was seeing things. It was when the iPod first came out, and Apple did this campaign with all the bright backgrounds and the black silhouettes. And I thought I was looking at stamps. I mean, in my mind, it was like wham. That was like it's like emblazoned as a past experience. So you can see these are basic. We used very basic kind of approaches, and that stuff hangs in there. And I had the campaign that Apple did was very effective. Now, I show the Apple campaign because I also just want to talk briefly about this whole thing of not using any of the three languages. We did develop a whole system of silhouettes that expressed all the things you had to know to find your seat. And basically, here you have only the symbol for the sport expressing what the sport was. You have only proper names of like the Stadio 68, the month. The color background is the day of the event, so all of the October 14 events was green background. The blue stripe tells you what to look for in the stadium. So if you were looking for entrance number 13, you knew you were looking for that, and then you just look for the sign that was the blue entrance number 13. So, you see it's kind of like, pretty obvious, but it worked. And we didn't have any complaints. These tickets worked, and we weren't relying on language as far as the spoken language. We used only the proper names of the installations and the sporting symbols to identify all of the places throughout Mexico City where the events took place. When we had qualifying events, we just simply used temporary signs. And for the more permanent signage for the finals and the major destinations. Peter developed a very ingenious signage system. It was a modular signage system, and this is where Peter and I really worked quite effectively together. And this is his system, and you can see we really heavily relied on the sporting symbols, and we used them decoratively on information booths. This is one of my favorite programming elements from the Olympics, and I did this with Peter. This is Peter's idea of working with paper again. He really had a lot of expertise in that. And you can see in the foreground, you see these are boxes type things folded up, and in the background you can see Peter putting these elements together. There's there's a surround and then there's a cross section, and what this is a system, again, based on imagery that is found in pre-Hispanic Mexico. This is at the site of Tule, and this is the site, it's the top of the pyramid, so you get this image of these towers, and this is Peter's program to send out to all the embassies and the consulates around the world to show what Mexico had programmed for the Olympics. So We also had a cultural program. We developed icons for all of that. Now, this was a part of the Olympics that was, unplanned for in some ways, the results of some of this iconography. You can see down at the bottom, the one that's the dove down the lower right-hand corner. That was the peace. We had a peace program. Each one of these, there were 19 programs, one for every one of the sports programs. And Dr. King was assassinated in the States at that time, and I was asked by the Mexican government to do a stamp for him. And actually, they were the first government in the world to issue a memorial stamp for Dr. King. Also, the students had an uprising, and they almost had to cancel the Olympics. There were over 500 students killed. These are some of the posters that they did, and you can see that they used the graphics that we had developed for the Olympics to do anti-government imagery in their posters. I gave a talk. I have to say that part of the experience was a bit difficult, and I can only describe my own feelings as saying I felt a little dirty from the whole thing because I was working for the Mexican government. I wasn't much older than the students then, and they were out killing students. And I had my instinct to preserve the Olympics was very strong because we had put a really beautiful program together, and the Olympics were in danger of being canceled. So, I stayed with the Olympic Committee. The Olympics did happen, but I just felt, I was involved in something that I didn't feel so good about. I gave a talk at the University of Mexico. This was about 1986. And after the talk, the rector of the design school gave me this book. And he thanked me for helping him as a student. He was one of the students out in the street during the Olympics. He was thanking me basically for giving him a language, giving these students a language that they could simply transform into anti-government, propaganda at that point. And it was a very effective program they did. And I got very emotional. I had to say that was like, it was like lifting that weight off my back with this whole thing. And I had no idea that, there were a bunch of students out there that were thankful for the work that I had the chance to do for the Olympics. So you really don't know how things work sometimes. You don't know what you're involved with. I stayed on in Mexico after the Olympics. I showed you the Olympics in a lot of detail because it's been a program that the principles and the things that we did have stayed with me in a lot of ways as far as having a really giant experience that's helped me develop a lot of ways of using visual communication in a lot of areas. I stayed in Mexico and did the graphics for the Metro. These are some of the early sketches in search of a logo for the Metro. The logo is basically the letter M. The 3 lines is where the Metro started, so it was just a natural connection to incorporate that as not just the suggesting the 3 lines, but the logo itself, the M. I developed a typography based on the geometry of the Metro logo. And here's where this is where the next step after the Olympics really occurred for me. I suggested that they develop a way of identifying the stations with iconography, and the battle there was, well, that's a good idea because it's good for the illiterate people. And I said, no, it's good for the illiterate people, yes, but it's good for all of us, because in a lot of ways, I learned that you can really communicate very quickly with iconography, and it's helpful in so many different areas. It was young at that point, as far as any kind of methodology was concerned, but we did develop the icons for the stations, and we did it in a meaningful way, and I could talk about this for a long time because there are a lot of lessons learned there. But the icons became part of the signage system. When you put them together, they gave you a very, very simple example of what a line was as far as all the station stops. When you put this into cars and you coordinated with icons in the stations, it was a very easy way for someone that didn't necessarily speak any language that you could understand by reading, like Spanish or English or Chinese or whatever. You could go to Mexico City with a friend, and you could rendezvous with each other by meeting at the duck station. As long as you could say it in your language, you didn't have to know what the name of the station was. And this was the first line in operation. This was the system map, and then since then I did the 3 lines, and now I think they have 12 lines. I haven't done all of that. The other part of that program was to develop the neighborhood maps, and this was very interesting. I worked with the architectural department at the Metro organization, and we developed the maps and did walking distance circles, and this was something I've used quite a bit after that. Okay, my daughter Stacy was born during that process. She was born in Mexico, so she's got Mexican citizenship as well as U.S. citizenship. That's Stacy. That's Stacy in the background. She's into kickboxing, so she's gotten a little athletic about this. That's my wife Neela over on the left, and that's my granddaughter Maya. And Jonathan, Stacy's husband, is actually he's British. His family's from London, so I have a Brit in the family, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But that's now, and I did a program for the World Cup, and I'm just going to show you one thing that I liked about that. I did the logo, the mascot for the World Cup in 1970. That's when Pelé and that whole team was playing in Mexico in '70. But the national bird is the eagle in Mexico. So I took the ball and birthed an eagle. And this was the mascot for the games. And one thing that the city does traditionally down Reforma, the main drag, is they put themes up, whether it be Christmas or what. And for the World Cup, they had Pico running all the way down. So I didn't design this, but this is a traditional thing they do in Mexico. So it was quite an honor to get things up in the Reforma. I came back to New York. This is the front of our townhouse in New York. It was an abandoned building back in 1970. We renovated it, and that's the office bay window. We live on the top 2 floors, and another family live on the 2 bottom floors. I joined forces with Bill Cannon. That's me over on the right, and Bill is the next to me. And then we were 5 at the office at this point. It was Wyman and Cannon. And coming back from the Olympics and the Metro and so forth, I had good recognition on my work. And one of the early programs that we did was develop a wayfinding system, a branding wayfinding system for the National Zoo in Washington. And of course, the eagle is the bird in the States too. So the idea was to take the adult eagle and combine it with the baby to develop an image of continuation, caring, these qualities that the zoo was promoting. So again, you can see the big influence of the simplicity of the icon, focusing on, in this case, the head silhouette of the bird for the main. That's the entrance sign. We did a fairly large sign, but put the graphics on glass so we weren't creating a billboard that you couldn't see through. And then did studies to develop icons for all the animals. And basically, this is one of the posters, and these are all the main trails at the zoo. So you can see the very, very direct influence from Mexico. And we did mapping, and I showed my experiences with mapping earlier, and that has been very, very helpful, the military experience and other ways of looking at doing mapping. Here we developed a very specific way of identifying the trails using the footprint of the animal that the trail was named after, and then developed what we call totems at the entrances to those trails off the main trail. So if you wanted to go and see all the exhibits on the Lion Trail, you would find that totem on the main trail and then go on the Lion Trail and then just follow the lion tracks. It would keep you on the trail. We worked with 3M Company to develop pavement integration with the elements. And these things would last a year, then you just overlay them. So that was very effective. Okay, now back to the public transportation. The Metro is just being built in Washington, and we had a chance to do the mapping for that. Massimo Vignelli had done all the signing, and because of the experience I had had with the Metro in Mexico, we got hired to do the mapping. and didn't stray too far from what I did in Mexico for the system, for the neighborhood maps. And we also developed a system map, and this was the first use of that map. It's based pretty much on the London Underground map, but it gets into landmarking and things like that, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But that was the first map. I'll come back to the map because it's currently, I'm working on it again. That's where this whole rock star thing came. I'll show you that. We did other programs for the Smithsonian Mall. Again, the iconography was very important. This is in 1976, these were put up, and I was just down in Washington last week. This is 2012, and they're porcelain enamel on steel, and they're still hanging in there. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about strategy and talk about other programs that have been very meaningful as far as developing ways of using branding identity and developing strategies and wayfinding systems. And this is up in the city of Calgary, up in Alberta, Canada. And what they have a bridge system they have about 6 miles of walkway that's on the second level. And the buildings are connected with bridges. This is an event they have once a year. It's the Calgary Stampede. And I'll talk a little bit about that because the impetus or the knowledge about the city and the history that was very helpful for me came out of going to one of these stampedes. The Stampede is a rodeo, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with a rodeo, but these are tough guys, I have to say, riding bulls and horses and so forth. And the other aspect of Calgary that was very important for this particular program, I had a chance to talk to a lot of the elders from the Blackfoot people, the Native Americans, and I talked to them because I noticed on the top of their teepees they had these very strong circle patterns, and I found out that they were constellations. So each family or each group that had a teepee that they brought down for the celebration of the Stampede, they had something on the top of the teepee in a star constellation pattern that was meaningful to them. So this was important. So the whole system of those bridges was called plus 15. So I thought, well, I'll make a star pattern out of the plus 15. And because it's a pedestrian walkway system, I put a little guy walking on it. Now the white hat, and this was one of those lucky moments because the mayor looked at what we were doing. He said, "You got to put the Stetson. The white Stetson is the symbol of the city of Calgary." And the idea of having a little walking figure with a white Stetson even made more sense. And we had a vehicle where we could get the damn hat in. So there it is. And we use this as the entrance identification for all the entrances into the buildings that service the bridge system. And the dot, the star circle, we used in the same way that I use tracks in Washington to get people around the zoo. We put tracks on the map, so to speak, of stars. And you could do this on the map. And it worked very well. We made all our maps into compass maps, so that it was always oriented the way you were looking at the map. And I won't get into too much detail here, but we identified the 4 directions, because when you're in one of those enclosed environments, it really is impossible to know which way you're walking. So this was very helpful in that sense, because you had a sense where north was and south and so forth. And like I said, we used the circles as a means of getting people through the system. And a circle is a very easy form. You can cut it into marble and inlay just a slightly different color of the same marble. So when you went through bank environments, you could do it in a way that looked respectful for them. And then in other areas where tiles and so forth were used in carpeting, we could use the same system. I bring my little cowboy back in because after going to the rodeo, I'm really glad that I didn't follow that one. That's even worse than boxing. I did get a white Stetson, though. The mayor gave me a white Stetson. So, and getting back a bit to the idea of doing things by hand, using compasses and so forth, and now everything, of course, we do with computers. Not everything, but pretty much everything. I started with the Mac Plus back in 1985 or 86, and I remember the symbols. I mean, that that was the first time really where iconography was looked at in a way that wasn't just for illiterate people. It was looked at in a way that was a way of navigating the computer system. And I still remember these things. This was like the awful thing that came up when you bombed. And these were part of the icon system that was developed for the first Apple computers, the Macintosh. Now, I bring again 1968 and 2000. In 2007, the iPod, introduced the icon as a navigating system that we all use, without even thinking about it now. But again, it's a technological change that really doesn't change anything except the attitude of using iconography to navigate. And certainly it changes the attitude about that. The iconography was always there, and there were, in smaller ways it was developed, but now it's being developed in a much bigger way. Getting back to my dad, again, that experience on the ocean was helpful. I did the wayfinding system for the South Street Seaport Museum in New York, and one of the things I wanted to do, and I usually talk more about the synthesis of taking two elements and combining, whether it be like an animal and a number, and you wind up with a branding element that's something of its own nature. Well, I've been doing experimental things where I try to do the same thing three-dimensionally. So for the wayfinding system at the seaport, I took the idea of the buoy and the idea of what they were using, the kind of sandwich board to put information out and posters and so forth, and the idea of combining the two of them. Now, here again, the computer was very helpful. We developed all the drawings and the computer of taking the buoy and combining it with the sandwich board, and then having it built. And it's a nice tool that is very comfortable in the environment along the waterfront with the ships, or in the interior part of the Seaport Museum. Very, very different environment. This is down in Santa Fe. I'm back down there where my grandfather told me all the stories. So that was kind of an interesting experience. Santa Fe, it's kind of like the Greek islands. If you're building anything, you have to keep it within the style of what is there already. And the adobe structure is what is mandated in Santa Fe. So this is basically an example of adobe. I want to talk a little bit about this because I want to leave the impression that what we do as designers can have an impact in other areas of strategy, where if you look at something as a problem and think in terms of solving that problem in visual terms, or at least in terms that support a problem solution. Now, this is the city of Santa Fe. Now, you see that yellow line that comes up from the left. That's the old Camino Real that came up from Mexico. And up in the top is the green section. That's the historic downtown. And the plaza is the center of that. Now, what was happening in Santa Fe is like what happens in so many cities where you have a big shopping center that is developed outside of the city, and it kind of drains all of the commerce and the energy out of the city. The same thing was happening with this yellow line. So one of the things that we looked at this and said, well, look at, if you want the center to be the plaza, make it the center. So what we did was suggest that they make the plaza the center of the city and develop identity for the northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest quadrants. In doing that, we keep the center always where it is, and we allow the city to grow as big as it wants to, as big as it can. And the idea of taking, I think that's the oldest government building in the United States. It's right in the old plaza. So I use that with the plaza image and put the water in, because I'd love to see them develop. They have a little river that runs close to the plaza, and like in San Antonio, they made a real element out of that, and it's been a very successful thing in the city. So that's the center. And then, you look at the southwest where the old Camino Real came in, and I use a colonial element there to identify that, and then just did the same thing all the way around, northwest, northeast. The old wagon trails came in from the east down in the southeast, so that's the symbol there. So, I don't have to go in and explain all of the connections and the meaning, but it's always helpful to keep things meaningful and to keep the iconography in a similar visual system if you can. That's very helpful. So this has been a very good program for them. You know, when you're driving into the city, it tells you what quadrant of the city you're driving in, and it always is suggesting that you're going into the center of the city. So psychologically, it put the center back where they want it. And of course, when you know, today, if you're doing any kind of programming like this, keep in mind that you should, you know, make it so that it can cross over into a lot of the availability that we have with technology. I show this because, you know, one of the things that I find, and I think this is probably true in every profession, but as designers, we talk to each other a great deal, and a lot of times have a hard time explaining what the hell we do to people that are not in our profession. And I've made it a real point in my career to really try to talk about this stuff so that just the average person in the street understands what the hell I'm talking about. And I had an interview, and I was flying out of Santa Fe, and the paper on Friday morning had the front page story on the program, and the fellow that I interviewed really got it, and the paper put it on the front page. So I feel good. I mean, of course, it's good for me, and you know, getting publicity doesn't it's not too bad, doesn't hurt. But I just feel really good about getting design on the front page. I think that's important. I'm going to stay down the Southwest and just run through something really quick, because I think this is 2 minutes? Okay. All right, here we go. This is the railroad that goes from south of Albuquerque up to Santa Fe. It's called the Rail Runner. And I did this in cooperation with an office in Albuquerque. And here the idea was based on the same thing as Mexico, identifying all the stations. This is part of their website, and they actually give all of the reasons why these icons are the way they are. And you can see that we ran through a lot of areas that are Pueblo areas, so we had to deal with getting sanctions from the Native Americans in these areas. The whole thing is based on the tile. The old Santa Fe railroad sign was a tile sign on the stations, and this, of course, reflects the colonial Spanish. We used for the signs the pole with stuff hanging on it. And the rest of this isn't very mysterious. I'll run through this. Is in Seoul, Korea. LG Art Center for LG Corporation. I won't explain any of this. It should be self-explanatory. But it's taking a branding element and putting it out in the environment. That is Frank Gehry to the right. I was working with Frank on the Brooklyn Arena, which didn't. I'm going to end with something that didn't happen. This is Frank's architecture, and it was really fun because I try to keep something in the environment that it's whether it be cultural for a city or whatever. But with Frank, I was working the graphics to be compatible with his buildings. Even the standard subway signs could be reflective of, give a sense of place for the stop. The Nets do have a new arena there. Yeah, there I am. I learned a few moves. This was the... And one of the things that I'm sad we didn't do, I wanted to bring it back to the street. Frank uses a lot of, we did in his early work, the chain fence. And I wanted to do a logo of Brooklyn Arena where the signs and so forth could use the fencing as part of it. Okay, I think I'm going to get done within my time. I showed you my presidential poster. Well, I did one of the official posters for Obama, and I don't know how you guys feel, but thank God he's got in for a second term now. This is for his first term, so I've gotten better with my presidential posters. I mentioned it's good to get stuff. This is the front page of the Washington Post, and this is because I'm redesigning not redesigning, but updating the design of the original design for the map, for the metro. I wanted to do icons for it. It didn't happen, but a book picked up on it, and it was put out there, and this is what I'm doing right now. They've added a new line to Dulles Airport, and it's on the table again. So, I mean, I don't know whether it's going to happen, but I'm going to try very hard to get icons because they make it easier to use the system, and they also give a visual overview of the city itself that can be quite interesting. That's my daughter's daughter. That's my granddaughter, Maya. And that's me. I'm still at it. And I think that's it. And that's my spiral. So if you're interested in any details, you can probably get more on some of these things than I had time to give you today. Thanks.